Hello and welcome to Algebras. In this lecture, lecture number 5, we will talk about nilpotent Lie algebras. Let us start with defining the notion of the derived algebra. Throughout the lecture, we denote by G a Lie algebra over K. The derived algebra of G, which is also known as the commutator of G with itself, is a K subspace of G spanned by all elements of the form the bracket of x and y, where x and y are elements in G. Note that we define the derived algebra as a subspace of G, so we need to argue why it is a subalgebra, but we have an even stronger property. We claim that the derived algebra is an ideal of G. To prove this, we need to check that given an element in J, if we form a bracket of this element with any generator of the derived algebra, we stay in the derived algebra. And this is quite easy. Given any triple of elements in G, the bracket of the first element with the bracket of the other two elements is by definition an element of the derived algebra, as the bracket of the second and the third element is an element in G. So this shows that indeed the derived algebra of G is an ideal of G. An easy example, if G is abelian, then the derived algebra of G is 0 because the Lie bracket on an abelian Lie algebra is identically 0. A less trivial example is that the derived algebra of SL2K over a field K of characteristic different from 2 is equal to SL2K itself. Recall that the Lie algebra SL2K has a basis consisting of elements E, F, and H, with the Lie brackets given as follows. The bracket of H and E is 2E, the bracket of H and F is minus 2F, and the bracket of E and F is H. Over a field of characteristic different from 2, we can divide here by 2 and here by minus 2, and deduce that E, F, and H belong to the derived algebra of SL2. This means exactly that the derived algebra of SL2 equals SL2, under the assumption that our field has characteristic different from 2. If the characteristic of our field is 2, then exactly the same computation gives us a different result, because now 2e is equal to 0, and similarly minus 2f is equal to 0. In other words, the only element of our algebra SL2 which can be obtained as commutator of other elements is the element H. This means that the derived algebra of SL2 over such a field is one-dimensional and is spanned by the element H. Now we can define what is known the lower central series of the Lie algebra. For each non-negative integer k, we define a certain subspace Gk of G. The subspace G0 is defined to be G itself. And for k greater than 0, we define Gk recursively as a commutator of G with Gk minus 1. In other words, Gk is defined as a subspace of G spanned by all elements of the form the bracket of x and y, where x is in G and y is in Gk minus 1. We claim that each Gk defined in this way is an ideal of G. We prove this by induction on K. The basis of the induction, the case K is equal to 0, is obvious since in this case G0 is just equal to G, which is obviously an ideal in G. To prove the induction step, we take two elements A and X in G and an element Y in Gk minus 1, and look at the bracket of A with a bracket of X and Y. As Y is an element of Gk minus 1, we can use the inductive assumption and deduce that the bracket of x and y belongs to Gk minus 1. In other words, the bracket of A with this element is in Gk by definition. We observe that G1 is exactly the derived algebra of G, and that, from the definition, we have a decreasing chain. G0 contains G1, this contains G2, and so on. This decreasing filtration is called the lower central series of G. For example, if we start with the Lie algebra GL to C, then the derived algebra of GL to C will be SL to C, simply because the trace of the commutator of any pair of linear operators must be 0, and so it must belong to SL2C. And by the computation from the previous slide, we know that the derived algebra of SL2C is itself. We will definitely obtain the whole of SL2C as a commutator of GL2C with itself. And because of the same properties that the derived algebra of SL2 is SL2, we will get that GK will be equal to SL2 for all k greater than 1 as well. So in this case, the lower central series of GL2C stabilizes at the first step as SL2C. Let us now define the notion of a nilpotent Lie algebra. A Lie algebra G is called nilpotent provided that some element of its lower central series is equal to 0. This means that the lower central series of such Lie algebra stabilizes as 0. Equivalently, we can say that the Lie algebra is nilpotent if there is a positive integer k such that a consecutive bracketing of k elements of this Lie algebra is equal to 0 for any k elements in the Lie algebra G. So here one can observe that this property is obviously inherited by all subalgebras of G and by all quotients of G. In other words, subalgebras and quotients of nilpotent Lie algebras are always nilpotent. As a very easy example, every abelian Lie algebra is nilpotent because the lower central series of an abelian Lie algebra stabilizes at 0 already after one step. A less trivial example is that the Lie algebra Nn of all strictly upper triangular n times n matrices over an arbitrary field K is nilpotent. The reason for this is the following observation. If we compute two upper triangular matrices, we get a matrix which is not only upper triangular, but is such that the diagonal just above the main diagonal of this matrix is 0. Further, if we compute an upper triangular matrix with a matrix which is upper triangular and has the first diagonal above the main diagonal 0, we will get a matrix which is upper triangular and such that the first two diagonals above the main diagonal are 0. And continue this after n steps, we for sure arrive at a 0 matrix. So the Lie algebra of all strictly upper triangular matrices is nilpotent. For n is equal to 3, the Lie algebra N3 of all strictly upper triangular 3 times 3 matrices has a special name. It's called the Heisenberg Lie algebra. So here is a small reference to the Hollywood series Breaking Bad. A negative example, we have seen that if the characteristic of the field K is different from 2, then the derived algebra of SL2 is SL2 itself. In other words, the lower central series of SL2 consists only of SL2s, which means that over such a field, the algebra SL2 is not nilpotent. If the characteristic of the field K is equal to 2, then the derived algebra of SL2 coincides with the span of the element H, and that element H commutes with the whole algebra SL2, which means that over a field of characteristic 2, the Lie algebra SL2 is nilpotent. And it is very easy to check that in this later case, the algebra SL2 is actually isomorphic to the Heisenberg Lie algebra. Let us talk a little bit about the center. The center of the Lie algebra G is defined as a set of all elements in G which commute with all other elements. Directly from the definition, it follows that the center of G is an ideal of G. Indeed, if we commute the center with the whole algebra G, we get 0, which is a subset of the set. So for example, a Lie algebra is abelian if and only if the center of this Lie algebra coincides with G. On the other hand, the center of the Lie algebra SL2 over complex numbers is 0. Indeed, an arbitrary element in SL2 can be written as a linear combination of E, H, and F with some coefficient. If we try to commute such element with H, using the commutator relations in SL2, we will see that the second summand will be killed, and the first summand will give us 2 alpha E, and the third summand minus 2 gamma F. For this to be 0, we deduce that alpha and gamma must be 0. Finally, if we try to commute an element beta H with E, we will get 2 beta E. For this to be 0, beta should be 0. So a central element of SL2 must necessarily be 0. we claim that a non-zero nilpotent Lie algebra has a non-zero center. Indeed, assume that G is nilpotent and look at the maximal possible non-negative integer k for which the component gk of the lower central series of G is non-zero. Then the commutator of G with gk is by definition equal to gk plus 1, and this is equal to 0 by the maximality of k. In other words, this non-zero subspace gk belongs to the center of G. A very useful observation is that an algebra G is nilpotent if and only if the quotient of G modulo its center is nilpotent. Here we know that one direction is clear because any quotient of a nilpotent Lie algebra is nilpotent. So the only thing which we need to prove is that if the quotient of G modulo its center is nilpotent, then G is nilpotent. To prove this, we can use the alternative description of nilpotent Lie algebras in the way that the consecutive bracketing of certain number of elements in G is 0. If we assume that G modulo the center is nilpotent, this means that there is a positive integer k such that the consecutive bracketing of k elements of G is 0 in G modulo the center, which means that it belongs to the center of G. Bracketing this with any element a0 of G, we get 0 because this element belongs to the center. This shows that bracketing arbitrary k plus 1 elements of G gives 0, which means that G is nilpotent. One of the most important properties of nilpotent Lie algebras is the so-called Engel's theorem. To motivate this theorem, we make the following observation. If G is a finite-dimensional and nilpotent Lie algebra, then the adjoint operator associated with any element of this algebra is nilpotent. So this means that some power of this operator is the zero endomorphism of G. This can be rewritten in the way that the consecutive bracketing of A with itself many times and then with some element in G is 0, which follows from the alternative description of nilpotent Lie algebra. Quite surprisingly, the converse is also true. This is the statement of Engel's theorem. A finite-dimensional Lie algebra G is nilpotent if and only if the adjoint operator associated to any element of this algebra is nilpotent. As we just discussed, we only need to prove the implication that in the case the adjoint operator associated to any element of G is nilpotent, that this implies that the Lie algebra G is nilpotent. From the previous slide, we know that it is enough actually to prove that the quotient of G modulo the center of G is nilpotent. Why is this helpful? This is helpful because the quotient of G modulo the center of G coincides with the image of the adjoint representation of G. So the quotient of G modulo the center is a Lie subalgebra of Gl of G given by the adjoint representation. This means that in order to prove Engel's theorem, it would be enough to prove a slightly stronger following statement. Let V be a finite-dimensional vector space and G a Lie subalgebra of G and V consisting of nilpotent endomorphisms of V. Then there exists a non-zero vector V in V such that GV is equal to 0. So this means that there is a non-zero vector of V killed by all elements of G. Since V is finite-dimensional, applying such claim recursively, we can find a basis of V with respect to which G becomes a subalgebra of the Lie algebra of strictly upper triangular matrices. And as we have seen before, the later is nilpotent. So in order to prove Engel's theorem, we need to prove a statement that any subalgebra of G and V consisting of nilpotent endomorphisms of a finite-dimensional vector space V has a common eigenvector with eigenvalue Z. The crucial component in the proof of Engel's theorem is the following lemma. We claim that if G is a subalgebra of G and V consisting of nilpotent linear transformations, then it has an ideal of codimension 1. How do we prove this? So let H be a maximal with respect to inclusions subalgebra of G, which is different from G. Then, for any element H in H, we have a nilpotent linear endomorphism of G modulo H given by bracketing with H. Since the dimension of H is by definition strictly smaller than the dimension of G, using the induction with respect to the dimension in our reformulation of Engel's theorem, we can deduce that there is an element x in G minus H such that the commutator of x and H belongs to H. In other words, such that this element x in the quotient space is a common eigenvector for each linear transformations bracketing with H with eigenvalue 0. From this property that the commutator of x and H belongs to H, it follows that the linear span of H and x is a subalgebra of G. Indeed, any element in the linear space is a linear combination of x and something in H, and the commutator of H and H belongs to H, the commutator of x and x is 0, and the commutator of x and H belongs to H. So this linear span is indeed stable under the Lie bracket. But H is an ideal in this Lie subalgebra, because the commutator of x and H belongs to H. It remains to note that by the maximality of H, this linear span must be equal to G. So G is obtained from H by adding one more element. In particular, H has codimension 1 in G. Now we can complete the proof of Engel's theorem. Consider the set of all vectors V in V which are killed by all elements in our subalgebra H. Since dimension of H is strictly smaller than dimension of G, by induction of the dimension, we can assume that W is non-zero. Observe that W is closed under the action of our additional element x. Indeed, if we take any element W in W, apply x to it, and try to act on the outcome by H, we can commute H and x on the expense of adding their bracket. So H applied to xW is equal to x applied to HW plus the bracket of H and x applied to W. H applied to W is 0, because W is in W, and the bracket of H and X belongs to H. In particular, the action of this bracket on W is 0. So this means that X applied to W stays in W, and since G is generated by X and H, it follows that W is G invariant. The action of X on V, and hence also on W, is nilpotent. This means that W must contain a non-zero vector V killed by X. So this vector then is killed by both X and H because it belongs to W. In other words, this vector is killed by the form of G. So this proves the reformulation of Engel's theorem and hence implies Engel's theorem. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the lecture.